Okay, does that look acceptable?
It does, thank you.
Okay, thank you for bearing with me with the technology here. I will, sorry, just make another couple of adjustments. Okay, and again, I'm Don Prater, FDA's
Sorry for
associate.
stopping you, but we don't see the whole, we just see half of the page. I think you need to zoom out a little bit and that.
Okay. Let me try again. I think maybe I can move my toolbar down here. It's better?
It's good now.
Okay, very good. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you all today and to participate in this course. I think I will tell you that I've been waiting for this invitation for maybe 20 years. I'm familiar with the work at University of Florida and with the Sea Grant program from my early days at my time at FDA. I'm a veterinarian by training. And so when I was going through veterinary school, I was really interested in fish. And so we had to take some extra courses and things. And so we had opportunities, I think, to hear about some of the great work going on at University of Florida. When I started at FDA, they were really working on medicines for fish. So we didn't have very many medicines approved. Of course, fish, crustaceans, mollusks, they all get disease, as you know. And we worked very diligently and staffed up something called an aquaculture drugs team. And so if you had a chance to look all the way down my CV, the very last line, it talks about my time there. And so I've been waiting here 20 years for this invitation, and really pleased to be able to share some thoughts with you today. What I've been doing since then, my time on the aquaculture drugs team, is I've been working in imported food safety. And so that's what I do now. And one of the really interesting points, I think, that I frequently say is that for imported food, it makes up about 15% of our food supply. But for certain commodities, it makes up quite a lot more. So I help oversee fresh fruits. About 55% of our fresh fruits are imported, 32% of our fresh vegetables. And you won't believe this, or maybe you will, because you know, the statistic for imported seafood, over 90% of our seafood is imported. And so I think, you know, there are a lot of drivers and changes in the industry these days. You guys are going to talk about some of these today. Cellular agriculture, really exciting stuff, a lot of innovation happening in this space. And so I would just say it's an exciting time to be a seafood professional. I think, you know, it's so important to the nutritious diet of our American consumers. It's at the forefront a lot of times on innovation, not only cellular agriculture, but you're going to hear about traceability. And so we are actually, my colleague Adam Friedlander will talk about a new traceability rule that we published, and also things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. So one of the things I've been leading for the last 3 years is a pilot to improve our import screening using artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But I was also asked to talk about food safety culture and FDA's new era of smarter food safety. So what I'll do today is I'll walk you through FDA's new era of smarter food safety, and I'll land at the end on food safety culture, which is really an emerging discipline within food safety. So it's something that I'm also co-leading this core element with my colleague Conrad Schwanier. But let me move further into the presentation. So in April of 2019, about 3 years ago, we launched something called the new era of smarter food safety. This builds on probably the biggest overhaul of the food safety laws in the US called the Food Safety Modernization Act. So that was passed in 2011. We've been implementing a number of provisions. One of the most recent provisions that we've implemented is the traceability rule. And I'll talk a little bit about that generally, and then you'll take a deeper dive with Adam on that. But let me just say that, as we sit here, one of my slides as a talking point says something about the precipice of change. And so I would be remiss if I didn't mention at the top of the hour that just yesterday, our FDA commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, made an announcement about the FDA's foods program. And so one of the things that you all will probably follow very closely over the coming months and years is Dr. Califf's new vision for our FDA foods program. So I won't speak a lot about that in the presentation today, but I did want to acknowledge that because that's hot off the press. And so it really pertains a lot to the organizational structure of how we work on foods. The Food and Drug Administration regulates 25% out of every consumer dollar, 25 cents. And so that includes not only foods, but medical products, devices, and other things. So you guys are getting this information hot off the press. Stay tuned for more information on FDA's organization of our foods program. But today I'm going to take a deeper dive on the new era of smarter food safety, which is something that we've been working on for the last several years. So the new era of smarter food safety, we actually published this idea talking about what are the things we're going to look at in the future. Traceability, some people call this the Achilles heel of our food system. And indeed, one of the things we work on in our office is foodborne outbreak response. And so when we have problems in our food safety system, whether it's due to a domestically produced or an imported product, there are illnesses that happen, unfortunately. And they are reported to CDC, and CDC tries to identify a food vehicle. And then the food vehicle we look at through traceback and trace forward to try to identify a contaminated product and get that product off the market. So traceability is really important. Also, predictive analytics and preventing foodborne illness in the first place. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But shortly after we announced this initiative on New Era of Smarter Food Safety, we published a blueprint that talks a little bit more specifically about some of those areas. And I'm going to walk through that today. But ultimately, our goal is to reduce the incidence of foodborne illness. Now, I think one of the things that you'll probably come to appreciate is the incidence of foodborne illness in the US hasn't really changed a lot. Despite our implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act and other things that we've been continuing to work on. We talk about bending the curve of foodborne illness, but there are still a lot of illnesses that occur. People are hospitalized, and unfortunately, people also die. So foodborne illness is still something that we're really working to prevent. In particular, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. One of the things that's been a game changer in that is whole genome sequencing. And so our ability to really make attribution and then increase the efficiency and effectiveness of our tracebacks is related to these developments on whole genome sequencing. So that's a game changer technology. And I'll talk about some of these game changing technologies as we walk through the new era. So let me go to the next slide. Here's one of these word diagrams. So what are we talking about? Smarter food safety. It's all these things. It's traceability, it's artificial intelligence, it's collaboration, a variety of different initiatives. It's digital. Everything, all information is getting digitized these days. I'll leave you with one thought in terms of food safety in the 21st century. It all comes down to data at this point. It's data and information. Better food safety in the 21st century begins and ends with better data. So you'll hear lots of references to data as I talk about the new era of smarter food safety. So there are 4 core elements. One is tech-enabled traceability. So this is an exciting area. There are a lot of folks that have been working in this area using some really powerful technologies. You've heard of distributed ledger, blockchain technology. That has the advantage of having high integrity on data, as well as being able to share it very rapidly. So one of the things that is changing in the traceability space is leveraging one of these game-changing technologies, distributed ledger, blockchain technology. But before we can do that, we have to have some foundational work, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Smarter tools and approaches for prevention and outbreak response. I've mentioned this outbreak response. It's really important that we be able to do this well. But overall, the place where we will make the biggest differences is in prevention and preventing contamination and foodborne illness. And so being able to predict those things, being able to use things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, sensors. You all have heard about the Internet of Things, connection devices. And so I think Internet of Things and sensors are going to be something that will be among the tools in our toolbox for smarter tools and approaches for prevention. The third core element of new era of smarter food safety, new business models and retail modernization. So we were working on this in 2019, right? So we knew that things were changing, the landscape, e-commerce in particular was changing, but there was an event, you've heard the term black swan events. The pandemic happened. And what we really saw in this space is that the trends for e-commerce that we saw, that we projected, were vastly accelerated. We have a lot of people that are starting to purchase things online, direct to consumer purchases. And so new business models has really changed. Retail modernization also impacted by the pandemic. If you noticed, a lot of the different food bars and things went away for a time. I think they're starting to come back, but there's a whole lot in the retail space that happens, and that it's particularly relevant for seafood. And then finally, food safety culture is the fourth pillar of the new era of smarter food safety. This is an emerging discipline. There's a lot of academic literature. I'll talk a little bit about that. But this is an emerging discipline in food safety, and it has to do with psychology and human behavior. What motivates people? I mean, we can write regulations, we can write, HACCP guidelines, we can put things on the wall, bulleted, things, reminders, but what really motivates people to be able to produce safe food? And there is some psychology about that. And if you think about it in the context of where things have gone with the internet and being able to click on things like all the time, we're enticed to click on different things as we're surfing on the internet. It comes back to human psychology. What interests us? What motivates us to do things? And so just as there are studies about what motivates people to click on things and to be able to research certain terms, it's the same in food safety. And this is really an exciting emerging discipline. I'll spend a little bit of time on this at the end, because I am very, very excited about this. Okay, let me go to the next slide. So the four core elements, I'll talk about these in the subsequent slides, but there is some more detail in terms of what's underneath these. You can go to the FDA website and look for the new era of smarter food safety blueprint. That'll contain a lot more detail under each of these and what I'm going to talk about today. Okay. All right, let's see. So let me talk a little bit about tech-enabled traceability. Let me just talk about traceability first. I mentioned it's the Achilles heel of our food system. What do I mean by that? So I said that, when people get sick, they go to their doctor, maybe. We know that the actual rate of people that are, diagnosed or hospitalized is quite a bit smaller than the actual rate of people that become ill. But they go to CDC, and CDC will start to do very sophisticated things like do food survey questionnaires to try to identify a food vehicle. They will, if they have samples, they will do whole genome sequencing. Used to be pulse field gel electrophoresis, but now I think we're doing a lot of whole genome sequencing. And what that allows our colleagues at CDC to do is to begin to aggregate and cluster cases together so that we know that these folks were infected by the same pathogen. And that is so powerful in terms of being able to identify a food vehicle and then be able to do the trace back. So whole genome sequencing is a game-changing technology. What happens for FDA is once a food vehicle is identified, then our team picks up and we start to try to identify. So we'll go to these questionnaires and look at what consumers told us. One interesting aspect about doing these tracebacks now is something called shopper cards. So again, technology comes in. How many folks, potentially have a shopper card at their local grocery store or big box retailer? A number of folks. These shopper cards can help provide very specific information about specific products that were purchased that really help facilitate our traceback. There's a lot of potential here. And so once the product goes through traceback, we start to look at, where did the retailer obtain this? Where did the distributor obtain it? We can take it all the way back to the farm or potentially the pond or the fishing vessel where something was harvested from. But what we don't have, or we haven't had until this point, is a common language of traceability. And so people will collect, there are fundamental pieces of information, who provided this product, what's their address, what is the product that they provided, how was it processed? But we need to have foundational pieces of information at different nodes in the system. And you'll hear my colleague Adam Friedlander talk about critical tracking events. And so in our rule, section 204 from FSMA, we talk about key data elements and critical tracking events. These are the fundamental pieces of information that we need to do traceability throughout the food system. We also need some sort of a unique identifier. So you'll hear foundationally about something called a traceability lot code. I'm going to go to the next slide. So building a foundational vocabulary information to help us in traceability is one of the first things that we will do. Also, as we look at traceability, I'm not going to talk about the rule. You'll need to know about the rule because it is a requirement. So there are things for FDA that you must do if you participate in the food system. So under section 204 of FSMA, when you hear this talk, remember that for certain foods, and seafood products are on this food traceability list. These are things that must be done in terms of record keeping. However, in the new era of smarter food safety, we talk about how to incentivize further traceability throughout the food system. And so part of doing that is having this common language. Part of it is being able to have a low bar for entry to be able to capture information. And so as people start to digitize information, as they begin to harmonize around these key data elements, requirements can help, but there are other things that we want to try to do to incentivize what we're calling end-to-end traceability. So you've heard all these terms, farm to fork, fish farm to fork, but it's really important. If you're a food business operator, you're going to build a system for probably all food, not just the foods that are on the FDA food traceability list that are required. So how can we incentivize industry adoption of traceability? Well, we know that there are some models. So if you think about, again, going back to, social media or things like that, there are services that you can get, thinking about, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. We don't pay for those services. We do pay, but maybe it's in a little different way in terms of being able to share data. So that's the way that some of these systems work. And so one of the things that we recognized in the new era of smarter food safety is there may be ways to incentivize industry adoption by lowering the bar to make them low to no cost solutions. So shortly after we published the new era of smarter food safety, we had all kinds of what we call solution providers that would come to us and say, hey, we have a system that can capture these data elements. We can put them on a blockchain. We can share them across different systems that will really facilitate, the work of the processors or the retailers in terms of being able to meet their requirements, or just whether it's a government requirement or a business requirement, it will help them to meet that. And so we actually launched something called the Low to No Cost Traceability Challenge. This is not part of the 204 rule. This is part of New Era, something to do to incentivize. And we have people we selected winners, and we let them make short videos. So if you go to the New Era website, you can see some really innovative solutions. People using, things like phones and camera technology to be able to capture information. I noticed that when we started the course today, there was a QR code to scan. So what makes that possible? Well, it's the fact that we all carry around a phone that has a camera, that has an interface with some of our other systems. And so again, this comes back to better data and information sharing. So take a look at those things that we did, these short videos. It will really give you a glimpse into the future, I think, of what will be possible. And then leveraging the digital transformation. Of course, everything is becoming digitized these days. More and more information digitized. As we do that, it allows these systems to really scale and to begin to work. Having that harmonized language about, what are the pieces of information that we need to capture will be helpful. But there's so many aspects of being able to leverage digital technology that you will see, I think, in your work and going forward, that will be just so exciting, will help people to be able to meet requirements, whether it's government requirements, business requirements, but ultimately to get safe food to consumers. So you'll see all these in our blueprint under tech-enabled traceability. Smarter tools and approaches for prevention and outbreak response. This is probably the most expansive of the 4 core elements. So root cause analysis. So when something does happen, so when we do have an instance of a foodborne disease, it's really important that we try to be able to trace this back and figure out what happened. One of the things that's a real challenge now is that it takes us so long to do the trace back. By the time we identify where the food came from and what were the conditions under which that food was harvested, processed, the food has long since moved on. It's long since moved through the food system. Takes us weeks, sometimes longer, to be able to actually trace back food safety problems to the source. The traceability stuff will help. I mentioned about blockchain and other things. One of the things, in addition to being immutable and having high integrity, is that it can be rapidly shared. And so we are hoping to really reduce that window for tracebacks, and that will help us in another aspect, and that's root cause analysis. And so as we get more tools, Internet of Things and sensors, we will be able to facilitate root cause analysis. But how we do this is going to be important. And so FDA has taken some steps and is continuing to work to set out some templates for how you do root cause investigation. But it's important. People want to move on. They want to get unsafe product off the market, and they want to move back to their prevention work so that the trade can continue to flow. But don't forget about root cause, because if we don't identify the root cause where we can and then take steps to correct it, sometimes these are very unique circumstances that are likely to repeat again. We need to, at every opportunity, to do root cause analyses. What's this? It's a big container ship. Lots and lots of containers. I'm not sure which port this is at. I think it's out west somewhere. I used to say that data was a huge challenge to FDA. We have myriad containers coming through. A lot of seafood comes through our ports. We have almost 400 ports of entry into the United States. And at each one of these ports, we have, I think, maybe 40,000 lines of entry every day coming through. Ultimately, it's about 14 to 15 million shipments of food products that come into the US every year. And FDA is charged with trying to figure out which one of these containers is likely to have a violative product. It's a huge task. We get lots of information. So as you may know, to be able to import product into the US, you have to provide prior notice and you have to provide a whole range of information for your imported product. That helps us. But at a certain point in time, we were really swimming in a sea of data, trying to find the needle in a haystack. What's changed in the last just 4 or 5 years is supercomputing power. The price of computing power continues to go down. So we have more powerful technology at less cost coming online. And what this has allowed us to do is to now look at large data sets and to be able to identify patterns that we've never been able to see before. So about 15 years ago, FDA launched an import screening system. We call it PREDICT. It's a rules-based engine, a lot of multi-criteria decision analysis. We take all these pieces of information, we try to aggregate them together and be able to assign a risk score so that our investigators or our other colleagues from CBP at port know which one of these containers to open up, which one of those boxes to crack open and take a sample. These things take incredible amounts of resources. To be able to send an investigator somewhere to find one of these containers, to sort through the boxes, to open it up, to take a sample, maybe it's a frozen, maybe it's a high value product. There's all kinds of considerations. What are they looking for? Well, they might be looking for antibiotic residues. They might be looking for microbiological contamination, decomposition. So if we lose cold chain, decomposition is a big one. What are they looking for and where? And then once they take a sample, to process these samples takes incredible amounts of resources. We have all kinds of mass spec machines to do things. We have folks that do this analysis for decomposition. But overall, if we spend those resources and we're not looking in the right place, we're not helping public health. And so we want to be able to look at large data sets and be able to increase the rate of being able to find violative shipments among all these containers. Now, the flip side of the coin is that safe product should be sped on its way to consumers. And so if we can use technology like machine learning to identify these patterns, we're going to be a whole lot more efficient. And so I think what we've done in our pilot is we've done a proof of concept. We've demonstrated that the technology itself works. We've also been able to look to see, can we deploy it across all of our ports in a dynamic way? I think we can. And now we're looking at those algorithms to be able to figure out what is the best machine learning algorithm for our use case. And so looking at the different algorithms is only sort of one part of being able to deploy a powerful technology like this. But in the future, just like every day, I'm sure you're bombarded with uses for artificial intelligence, machine learning. This is one, import screening. We're hopeful that what we're learning here will help us more broadly. For example, where to go to send our investigators if we're doing a facility inspection. And so we will try to leverage all of our lessons here, but that's part of what we're doing in this element of New Era Smarter Food Safety. Domestic mutual reliance. So this is working with our state and local partners. We do this a lot in Traceback, but our state partners also have laboratories as well. And so these laboratories and their staff, they will go out, and not only are they looking at things that are coming in and through imports, but we're also doing sampling and things at retail. So we publish a lot of this information on our website, but we do look at what we're doing across the supply chain, and we work together with our state and local counterparts. And so being able to utilize the information that they generate from their labs is really important, making sure that we're following similar methodologies, that we have confidence in the data and information we're generating and sharing. So more on that, but that's a really important area: state, federal, local cooperation. Inspection, training, compliance tools. Everybody thinks about FDA, they think about inspections. Where's that investigator going to come from? Is he hiding behind the next container to pop out and surprise somebody? We don't really surprise folks. We do unannounced inspections, but more importantly, in the future, it's being able to use data and information so that our investigators show up at the right place at the right time with the right tool. And so we have a lot of tools to use, and being able to show up, is it an environmental swab that we look for microbiological contamination? Is it something to collect a sample? Is it a camera to be able to look at labeling? If you think about computer vision, this is the ability of cameras to scan things very rapidly. Think about all the labeling, allergen labeling. So for seafood, allergen labeling is really important. And if you look at our violation rate, one of the highest parts is violations due to allergen labeling. So how can we look at that? Well, we can look maybe in the future using computer vision and some more sophisticated technologies, again, to help us to become more efficient and more impactful for public health. So that's what we're looking at under this part of the core element. Outbreak response, I mentioned this. So we're getting a lot better whole genome sequencing, helping us, working together with our state and local partners, working with our international partners too. When it comes to seafood, some of the partnerships that we have with our international partners are really critical. So we get seafood from all over the world that comes in. These guys have their own methodologies and techniques. And so being able to integrate them into our outbreak response, and again, using everything like traceability information, like predictive analytics, like root cause investigation, is going to help us tremendously in how we do outbreak response. In fact, we just published a new outbreak response improvement plan. And so this is a place that I think in the future will really help bend this curve of foodborne illness. Recalls. We don't like this, but it does happen. When unsafe product is identified, really important to get that product off the market. One of the challenges with doing outbreak investigation is sometimes we can't quite get all the way to the particular source of the problem. So sometimes recalls are initiated that are more broad than they need to be. And so in the future, in the new era of smarter food safety, we will use tools like whole genome sequencing, like traceability. We'll use all these tools to make recalls a lot more focused and effective. And so we're also taking a look at how can we ensure that when a recall is announced, I mean, a firm will put out information, recall these lot codes or these best if used by dates. But how can we actually make sure that these products get off the shelf, or in the case of seafood, where a lot of it is frozen, out of the freezers of retailers or restaurants or consumers? This comes back to food safety culture and the role for consumers. But we do have new technologies that we'll bring to bear, thinking again about that smartphone in our pocket and how we do recall modernization. So next, I'll talk a little bit about new business models and retail modernization. believe it or not, this slide is based on data pre-pandemic. And so if you look at the online share of the grocery basket, about 20% of it was envisioned by 2023 to be coming from online. My guess is that this was really accelerated during the pandemic. We had consumers that had never ordered anything online before starting to use this. And so one of the other interesting things that we noticed is that some of these new users of technology, these are part of populations maybe that are more vulnerable as well. So it's older folks, it's folks that have not traditionally been doing things online because it was perceived to be maybe something that they couldn't quite access, but now it's more accessible to folks. And I think we're going to see an acceleration, a continued acceleration in trends toward online shopping and e-commerce. So what does that mean for us as seafood professionals or as regulators? Well, we need to ensure that the safety of the food that's being produced and delivered being using these new business models. One of the things we heard of in the during the pandemic, dark kitchen. I don't know if that's something that folks have recognized. So these are operations that prepare and deliver food. Maybe they're not a place that's open to the public that you could normally walk into. So making sure that these folks are aware of some of their responsibilities. Another concept here in new business models is the last mile. So as we have food being distributed directly to consumers, we have a lot of players that are involved in that last mile. Think about all those things that show up at your doorstep. What kind of temperature control do you have there? There are all kinds of really innovative packaging techniques that are being used now. Maybe in the future, we'll see increasing amounts of sensors and data being shared. Again, you can get a ding on your phone, package has arrived. Maybe it's seafood that's in that package. Maybe I need to, phone a friend and make sure that that package comes inside quickly. So there's all kinds of new and exciting technology that will help us to provide safe seafood products to consumers. We have to learn about these new business models. Sometimes these things are developing so quickly that we're not really being able to quite understand and figure out what are some of those risks. We hosted as part of New Era about I think it was last October, an e-commerce summit, and so it was very enlightening. And again, these are products that come from all around the world, potentially directly to consumers. So they're not coming through some of our ordinary channels where we have some of our food safety controls. So again, something that we're very much interested in continuing to learn about and evolve our systems to make sure that food is safe. Time, temperature control, you guys spend a lot of time on that, but very important at retail. Also modernizing approaches to retail safety. FDA publishes the food code, the FDA food code, which states, will implement. A lot of these are state laws and that need to follow sort of a harmonized approach of the FDA food code. There's a lot of new things that are happening out there, and a lot of them sort of end up in retail. So we need to continue to modernize our approaches to retail food safety. Okay, let me talk about food safety culture. My boss, Frank Yanis, wrote the book, or one of the books, on food safety culture. He was one of the really, I think, early adopters, early folks to flag the importance of what's happening with food safety culture. So in New Era, we are looking at food safety culture. This is an emerging discipline, as I mentioned, in food safety. It has to do with psychology. It has to do with communication. It has to do with, it's a lot of behavioral science. It has to do with norms. And so if you look at a lot of the maybe catastrophic failings, whether it's food or whether it's aviation or something else, whether it's NASA and space shuttles. If you look at some of these, low probability, high consequence, catastrophic events, when you do the investigation, the root cause analysis, why did it happen? A lot of it comes back to culture. And so people were either unaware or were willing to ignore certain risks because it was not the norm in their organization. We didn't want to listen to the people, about O-rings or seat belts or other things. And so as part of the organizational culture, that information didn't get conveyed to the right people. That wasn't able to be acted upon. And so catastrophic things happen. It happens in the food system as well. So we have, our own examples in the food system of where we've had organizational culture failures that have resulted in broad food safety issues. And so I think, what we want to learn about is how can we promote food safety culture throughout the food system? How can we recognize this when we walk into a facility? One of the things, that I've learned from my time in Brussels is that our colleagues in the European Union have actually adopted a new chapter in their food hygiene rule on food safety culture. And so their approach will be to go out and try to look to see if firms have strong food safety culture. They've tried to define some indicators for that, and they're actually inspecting against that. At FDA, we've said that we're still learning. We're doing our foundational work right now. There are no current requirements on food safety culture. We're not inspecting against that, but it is something that we're very much interested in. In fact, we're so interested in it that we recently had training courses for all of our food safety investigators and a number of our state partners on food safety culture. What is this new and emerging discipline? What is this? What makes it different about looking for psychology and behavior? How can you potentially measure this and take this into account if you are, out doing your work? So we are looking at ways to promote food safety culture, but we have to do some foundational work first. We know that in industry is investing millions of dollars in food safety culture. They are putting people in their hierarchy. One of the positions that you'll see in some firms now is they have a team lead or a manager for food safety culture. And it's that important. And they're also measuring their return on investment. So this is something to be to pay attention to, because it is going to be part of the landscape in food processing plants, in all the places along the food system. Food safety culture is going to be important. So what are we doing at FDA? I mentioned we're doing training. We've also done and published recently systematic literature review. I mean, this is real stuff. Some people would say, oh, it's behavior, it's psychology, I need lab findings, I need an analytical test. But I can tell you that this has the potential to be as impactful as any analysis or analytical test. So we're doing our foundational work at FDA. We're training ourselves on what is this discipline? How can we potentially recognize it? How can we measure it? How can we promote it? How can we take it into account? So when we do our regulatory oversight, we can only go to a certain number of facilities. And so we want to go to those facilities that are more likely to have problems so that we can help. And so understanding food safety culture and being able to take it into account is something that we're very interested in. So I would encourage you, look on our website at that systematic literature review. If you've never heard of food safety culture before, what is this? That's a great place to start. We asked some research questions. It's got the literature there. You can actually go there and see. We just published it, I think, maybe in the last month or so. Also, the training, I think we're helping to make that available to state partners. So it's potential that you may actually see some of this training on food safety culture. And then I mentioned consumers. So consumers have a role as well, right? If it's a recalled product, We want them to get that out of their freezer. Then maybe they purchased it a month ago and it's been in there and they've kind of forgotten about it. How can they learn, what's in there? We're talking about smart kitchen equipment. We're talking about smart refrigerators, maybe that will help with expiration dates or even knowing what's in your refrigerator. So if you've got something in there that's problematic, that's the subject of a recall, maybe there's a way by connecting these data points that you could be notified. So wouldn't that be nice? Instead of, having to go, to some documentation, now it's on the website. It used to be pieces of paper hanging in the grocery store, but to actually be proactively notified. And so how do we get consumers to actually think about this and to be able to adopt this? We've been working for a long time with consumers about, clean, separate, chill, cook products. How do we make those messages more effective? Well, maybe the message doesn't need to come from FDA. Maybe the message will come from an influencer. My daughters tell me, you can see them over my shoulder. They tell me about these folks that are influencers. I watched this cooking show. It was great. This guy really knows his stuff. And, so in the cooking show, these guys can really demonstrate, some of these things, and maybe it gets into the consumer psychology a lot more. We can figure that out. We can measure that. It's like the folks that are measuring when we're clicking on something. It all comes back to data, and it comes back to psychology. So this food safety culture, if you haven't had a chance to hear about it, do take some time. As a food safety, as a seafood professional, it will be something that will intersect with your work. So I think I'm getting close to the end here. Just maybe a couple more slides. Where can you find out more? And that's the end of my presentation. So I'm happy to pause and answer some questions.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. You can, if you're on the Zoom, you can give Dr. Prater a virtual applause. This was great. We are going to open it up to question. If you have any question on the Zoom, let's start with the Zoom. Feel free to unmute yourself. I can read the question in the chat as well. So we have a question about what is the vulnerability that keeps you up at night? So Rose, do you want to expand on that question? Andrew Rose?
I'll keep my camera off. I wasn't expecting to speak, but I think the question speaks for itself. But if you're willing, or maybe just a broader set of vulnerabilities, I'm just curious what's out there.
Yeah, Andrew, great question. And I will tell you that what concerns me is something called anonymity in the supply chain. As products come through, products are processed and mingled, commingled. It's very difficult and challenging to figure out sometimes where things are coming from in the supply chain. It's important for the reasons that I mentioned, because depending on where the products were coming from, there might be increased risks associated with those products. And if I can't tell where a product came from, then it makes it more difficult for me to decide, do I need to send an investigator to actually open the box, take a sample? How can we potentially get a problematic set of products off the market while continuing to maintain a very narrow scope on a recall? What are we doing with respect to solving that problem about anonymity in the supply chain? Well, the traceability information, I think, will help. I think that's going to be probably one of the biggest steps forward. If you have that information that becomes high integrity, good data quality. I mean, I said better food safety begins and ends with better data, but it begins and ends with high quality data. These are powerful tools that we have, the machine learning. If you put bad data in there or the wrong data, they can quickly skew. And so in addition to looking for more data, we need more high quality data, and having more pieces of that information available in the food system, I think, is going to help reduce anonymity in the supply chain and overall, I think have a big public health impact, big business impact as well. Great question.
Thank you. Do we have any other question in the chat? Scott Zimmerman is asking, talk about the role of third-party certification and how this impacts the review of a processor and or a product.
Yeah. Let me talk about third-party audits. These are what I'm thinking about when I say a third-party audit. I'm thinking about the private audits that happen primarily in a business-to-business context. So this is not the FDA compliance inspection or a state partner. These are things that primarily, for example, retailers might ask of their manufacturers. So there are lots of third-party certification programs that are out there. We are actually undertaking, I'm leading another pilot at FDA to look at alignment between the third-party certification programs, what are they looking for, and the actual food safety requirement in the US. So we'll have some interesting things, I think, coming out of this pilot soon. People spend a lot of money on these programs. If you look at all these third-party certifications under the Global Food Safety Initiative benchmark, that's 145,000 audits every year. So the scope and reach of these are quite a bit larger than what we can do from a regulatory standpoint. One of the things that we need to do is to see how these certification programs align with the actual requirements. That's what we're doing in the pilot. But then to also start to look at them relative to food safety outcomes. And so obviously, businesses have confidence in these third-party certification programs, but I think we need more data and metrics that will help validate that. So that's a real opportunity. And then it comes back to data sharing. And so one of the things that we're really interested in is how can we share information from these third-party audits? How can we capture certain pieces of information, whether it's aggregated across a particular sector or whether it's very specific to facilities, and to be able to use that in our predictive analytics. So third-party certification programs underpin a lot of global food safety. They are places that we can't get to. They get the things more often. And there's a big opportunity, I think, here to try to be able to leverage them and to maybe, help make them better along the way.
Thank you. Let me check the chat. While we are waiting for more question, I have a question. So I have a big picture question. How do you think this new era of a smarter food safety is going to affect our workforce, especially in post-harvest processing in food industry, that they are not very highly skilled? So we are throwing this foreign concept to them, use data, AI. How is that going to affect? How is this whole initiative? It's going to affect our skill, like workforce that are not necessarily very skilled, but we are highly dependent to them for the food system to keep going.
Yeah, great observation. I think very insightful and a good question. So one of the things that, in terms of imported products coming in, we see that the supply chains for seafood are actually very long. And so we've developed some graphics, I think, to illustrate this over time. Due to labor costs, product are really transported. It bounces all over the globe sometimes before it comes, to consumers in the US or other places. How do you address the workforce to try to keep them educated, and I would say motivated, with respect to food safety culture? My guess is the skill levels overall are probably going to continue to increase. The processing pieces will become more technologically advanced. So I think there's already a continued trend in terms of what do you have to do by hand versus what can you do through robotics or something like that. But there has to be continued education on this workforce, because if people don't understand what they're doing from a food safety perspective or some other processing perspective, then there will be breakdowns in the system. And as these systems become more efficient, as they become larger scale, the consequences of the breakdowns are going to become larger. And so I think education, training, understanding, the motivation about, why people do something or don't do something is going to be really important in that workforce. I think there's going to probably become a lot more gradations in the workforce. So people will be more sophisticated in some particular skill, but they will have to assimilate all these new tools and all the requirements. So, I keep talking about data. Well, generating those data points with high integrity is a skill that's probably going to have to be added as well. So as we increase analytical capabilities, as we increase processing robotics, there's got to be continued education and maybe even some more gradation or segmentation across that workforce.
Great, thank you. Do we have any question from anyone? Okay, we have Victor Garrido asking us a question. Would you please speak
Yeah.
loud? So
Just a comment and then a question. The comment is kind of following up. You get closer to the
yes,
speaker.
he is gonna come closer to the speaker so you can hear
Thank you.
him better.
The comment is actually that dependency on workers to do or capture that data. We've been challenged through many years because we don't have that good data in our hands. We always depend on the lowest denominator of that chain to be the one either entering the data manually or capturing it somehow in there. So I think about an evolution of working with applications on the cell phone, because now everybody has a cell phone, or a more sophisticated robotics, like you mentioned, is going to be the key to be able to capture that data and share that data throughout the chain. Now, my question to you is how do you feel the industry willingness to participate and adopt all these new programs, new regulations, new things, and even get involved in recalls and all that, which is a big headache. So do you see an evolution towards being more regulatory friendly, if you want to call it that way, or and be able to be proactive, or you've seen a steady state through time?
Yeah, it's a great observation. And again, it comes back to data quality. Largely our traceability systems, you might hear from my colleague in a few minutes, they're still paper-based. We know that we're going through the digital transformation, more information being digitized. As you do that, you have the possibility not only to capture more information, but to capture more accurate information. Having small multifunctional devices like a cell phone, I think are going to be, real opportunities to be able to change, that paradigm. The other thing that I see coming in the future is there's probably a greater alignment between some of the business interest and the business case and the regulatory sphere. And so those things that are good business will also be things that are good for public health. And so I think they're going to become a lot closer aligned because there are big consequences if you have food safety problems. And so a lot of the things we're actually building on as we think about some of these requirements, we're being led by industry. Now, certain segments of industry are a lot more advanced. And one of the things that and I think, your question or observation highlights is there's a whole range of, from small processors or small harvesters, to the large sophisticated operations. But I think as these technologies become more available at lower cost, that's going to help the folks that are, the small to medium size. And that will be good for business. And I think ultimately being able to do that will be good for public health. Trying to figure out how to do that, I think, is where we can work together. But I see that happening in the future.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat from Scott Zimmerman, and he's asking, are PGAs legally able to share processor records when copies are made for various auditing purposes? For example, will NOAA SIMP chain of custody audit records be made available to FDA?
Yeah, great, great question. It's one of our continued challenges about data sharing information. One of the things I'll leave you with, I don't have a specific answer for that question, but one of the big things that we're working on are something called data governance structures. So how do we share data and information? How do we maintain commercial confidentiality? So supply chains contain a lot of what we call commercial confidential information. And sometimes, the willingness or the ability to share information is constrained by being able to protect some of that information. And there are good reasons to do that. So the way we're going to approach that is through data governance structures. So if somebody sets up something on a blockchain, who can see that? And what can you see? And so data governance structures are going to be really important. And as we build these systems, we got to get it right at the beginning, because the systems will build, they will scale. And if we don't get the data governance structure right at the beginning, it will be harder to change later on. So we need to give some thought to this. And I know people are thinking about data governance structures so that we can share information between folks that need to see it, yet be able to keep those confidential, trade secret, other pieces of information, protected. And so there are ways to be able to do this. So we're looking at sophisticated techniques like de-identification of data, aggregation, being able to anonymize certain data. And those are going to be really important techniques as we go forward. We're looking at data sharing platforms. So I will just say under Core Element 2, stay tuned for what we're doing in the seafood space on data sharing platforms.
Great, thank you so much. Do we have any question in the room? Let me check the chat. I don't see any other question in the chat, but I want to ask one more question before I let you go. So it's kind of relevant to my previous question. We know when we talk about AI and using AI in food system, there is always a concern that it cannot be inclusive. Do you think, is there any ways that AI actually make our food system and food safety effort more inclusive? Like, what are the positive parts of using AI to make our food system more inclusive?
I think that's a great observation. I think it's something that we will probably continue to explore. I think, these are powerful technologies to be able to look at large data sets. And I think there are all kinds of opportunities, I think, to improve inclusivity and in terms of, being able to make that information available. There's a concept called democratization of data. And so I think that's another thing to look forward to, and to be able to figure out how we do that as we analyze large data sets and make that available. I think we'll hopefully address that observation as well. So great question.
Thank you so much. It was great having you. Thank you so much for your time. And we are gonna move on to our second speaker, Mr. Adam Friedlander. He's a food policy analyst from FDA, and he is gonna, thank you so much, Dr. Prater. He is gonna talk about the new traceability rule. He's gonna give us some overview of the rule. We know that the industry doesn't need to comply with the rule until 2026, but I think this is a good time for all of us to learn more